Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are digging into a number that is, well, it's pretty shocking. It might just be the key to understanding why so many of us feel financially squeezed, even when we hear the economy is doing great. So, let's get into it.
All right, let's kick things off with a question that sounds super simple, right? How much does it really take to just get by, to survive in America today? Well, the answer is way more complicated than you'd think, and it tells a fascinating story about our modern financial world. And here is the problem in a nutshell. On the one hand, you've got the official U.S. government number for a family of four, which sits around $31,000. But on the other hand, a new calculation, based on today's real costs, puts that number closer to $140,000. So how on earth did we end up with this massive, massive gap?
To figure that out, we actually need to jump in a time machine and go all the way back to the 1960s. We've got to look at the original blueprint for how this whole poverty line thing was invented in the first place.
So, this whole thing was cooked up by an economist named Molly Orshansky. And her logic, for the time, was actually pretty brilliant and simple. It was all based on one single idea: find a family's biggest expense and build the formula around that.
And her formula was, surprisingly simple. Just 3 steps. First, figure out the absolute rock-bottom cost for a family to eat for a year. Second, notice that food costs took up about a third of the average family's budget back then. So, third, you just multiply that food cost by 3. Boom, poverty line. And you know what? Back then, this made total sense. If you look at a typical family budget from the 60s, food was the king. At 33%, it really was the biggest chunk of their spending, so using it as the anchor for the whole calculation was a solid move.
So what happened? I mean, if the logic was so sound, why does that $31,000 number feel like it's from another planet today? Well, here's the thing. The formula itself didn't break. The entire world just radically changed around it. And here is the big reveal. Just look at this. This is a modern household budget, and the whole pie chart has been turned on its head. That anchor, food, it's gone from a third of the budget down to a tiny 6%. And look what's taken its place. Housing, healthcare, childcare, they've just exploded. And these are the new budget killers. Things that now dominate our spending but were barely a blip on the radar, financially speaking, back in the 60s. That original formula, it just never really accounted for them. So here's the crucial point. The formula was basically frozen in time. For decades, it was just easier to adjust the old number for inflation rather than actually rethink the logic. So the measurement stayed the same, even as our entire economic reality did a complete 180. Okay, now for the really cool part. What happens if we take Molly Orshansky's original logic, but we plug in today's actual numbers? Let's see what that looks like.
So the first way to do this is pretty straightforward. We keep the original 3-step formula, but we just swap out the main ingredient. Instead of food, we use today's biggest expense, housing, but we'll keep the assumption that that big expense is about a third of the budget.
And when you do that, using just the national average rent, you get this, $72,000. I mean, wow. Just that one little change more than doubles the official poverty line, and we haven't even touched things like healthcare or childcare yet.
Okay, so that's one way. But what if we try something a little more direct? Let's just build a modern budget from the ground up. Let's add up what it actually costs for the basics, the non-negotiables. And, super importantly, let's include the taxes you'd have to pay on that income.
And that is how we get to around $140,000. That's the gross income needed to cover the basics. But what's really wild about this number isn't what it includes, it's what it leaves out.
And this is so important to understand. This number is not about living large. This is for modest living. We're talking no vacations, no restaurants, no saving for retirement or college. This is just the bare minimum cost to be stable in today's world. It's just survival.
So, you see, this isn't just a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. This directly explains that feeling of, well, running on a hamster wheel. It connects the dots on why so many of us feel financially trapped, even with what seems like a decent paycheck.
And this right here, this explains that frustrating feeling, right? The news tells us the big macro picture is good. Unemployment is low, the economy is growing, but our personal micro-reality is a daily battle with sky-high rent and bills that make it feel completely impossible to get ahead.
Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Hey, I make way less than that, and I'm doing okay. And you're right, that is absolutely true.
Millions of families are incredibly resourceful and find ways to make it work.
But that's not really the point, is it? The point of a number like this isn't to say it's impossible to live on less. The point is to show just how high the starting line for basic financial stability has been moved, forcing almost everyone to make really tough choices and sacrifices.
Okay, another thing you hear all the time is, well, if it's so expensive, just move. Pack up and find a cheaper town or state. Simple, right?
While the data shows that's getting harder and harder to do, this isn't just a big city problem anymore. It's a national one. Even in the so-called cheapest states, the cost of housing compared to what people actually earn there is at a crisis level. The reality is, the cheaper place is becoming a myth.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's really important to separate what these government formulas measure from what you personally can control. These numbers, both the old one and the new one, are about survival. They set a baseline. But what you do, your habits, that's what builds possibility.
Which leaves us with one last big question for you. The system we live in is trying to navigate today's world using a map from 1963. So the question is, are you? Knowing the real cost of living is the first, most powerful step you can take to build a financial plan that's based on your reality, not an old formula.